Welcome to the Rock Interview Series with host Thomas S. Orwatt Jr.
Welcome to episode number 119 of the Rock Interview Series. I'm Thomas Orwatt Jr., and today's date is April 7th, 2025. In this episode, I have the return of guitarist GUNS-Tracii Guns of the legendary glam metal band LA Guns as my guest. During this episode, Tracii talks about the new LA Guns release entitled Leopard Skin. In addition, we discuss the band's upcoming tour, his favorite LA Guns release, and much, much more. So let's get started. Here is GUNS-Tracii Guns. Hey everyone, welcome to the Rock Interview Series, and we have the return of the rock and roll legend GUNS-Tracii Guns with us of LA Guns. Tracii, how you doing on what was supposed to be a Black Monday today, but it looks like we maybe avoided that?
Well, I don't know.
Well, I'm hoping.
Yeah. I mean, we all hope, for prosperity, don't we?
Yeah, we'll save that for a different interview. We want to talk about this great record that you guys put out called Leopard Skin. It just came out on Friday, and I'll tell you what, like I read the press release, and it is pretty spot on. I mean, it's pretty much what the press release says. This is an organic record that has a lot of diversity. It sounds, it definitely has the signature LA Guns sound to it, but it does have that kind of Stones vibe to it, that Aerosmith vibe to it. Your guitar playing is great. Your tone is great. Phil Lewis sounds great. I mean, the record is very impressive.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. It was definitely a little bit of a left turn into, some vintage rock sounds and, still maintaining the high energy of the band. And then, of course, Phil, I mean, I can't say enough good things about Phil. He just seems to be getting a little bit better every record. It's amazing.
Yeah. Now you guys been on a tear since 2017, since you and Phil got back together. This is your fifth record in 7 years. And you've released a Sunbomb record too with Michael Sweet. Yeah, and you also did the one with Jack Russell too. So Tracii, I mean, how are you doing it, man? How are you able to produce so much music in such a short period of time?
I don't know. It comes from the sun, and it keeps us alive, and it keeps something coming out of my hands to the guitar that makes it highly addictive, most importantly, and it keeps me interested in the things that I love about music, and most of those things are old nostalgic things by now, but kind of sticking to those principles keeps LA Guns healthy and keeps the band happy, because we really make records for ourselves, something that might be missing currently or recently from our record collections. We like to fill in those gaps with our albums.
No, I remember talking to you about almost a little less than a year ago, and you told me that this record was you were just finishing this record up.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what led you to go into this direction that you did for this record?
I think it was really time to come up for some air, where the past four records are really heavy in mood. Like there's a very heavy mood kind of, going across all those records with a lot of classical influence. And, a better term might be more melancholy kind of sound and emotion. And it was really time for the band, because we've kind of had our head down, pushing forward, making records and touring and taking care of the band. So it felt like time to, kind of do a celebration album in a way, something along the lines of what we would sound check rather than what we normally play live, because when we sound check, we do play a lot of heavy funk and a lot of R&B and a lot of psychedelic blues. And, so I felt like, if I could capture kind of what we do at sound checks as opposed to what we normally do live, then that would be great for the band, and the band couldn't be happier.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think your fans are pretty happy too after they hear
Yeah.
this. Now, you also switched record labels. See, you went from Frontiers Music to the Cleopatra Records.
Yeah.
What led to that decision?
All great relationships end. If there's one thing I've learned at 59 years old, that, nothing's forever, and with Frontiers, I had already done such a huge body of work, and you know, like you said, the side projects and the LA Guns albums and the live records and the EPs and, like, 5 year span, that for me, I think that we had done all that we could do and still stay excited, and the key to the success in the music business is having a team that's always excited, and kind of getting rid of anybody that's toxic or bored or whatever it is. And Brian Pereira from Cleopatra, we've been friends for over 40 years, and he's been wanting to do this since we got back together, but now was the right time. Now
Yeah.
it made the most sense. And they were based out of Austin, Texas, while we were on Frontiers, and now they're based in LA again. So that makes a huge difference. And that was the one kind of issue with Frontiers. They're based in Italy. So, unless I was in Denmark, it was really hard to communicate with them, in the same time zone. But luckily I was in Denmark for, all those years. And so it made it easier. But now that I'm back in LA most of the time, it makes more sense to have a label based here.
Yeah, it seems like Cleopatra is really focused on the band. You could tell by the quality of your first two videos that you've released for the record that
Yeah.
it does seem like, you're a main priority for them.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. We're birds of a feather. So when it came time to make videos, there were different directions we could have gone in. But I just personally, I'm kind of over the epic video. You know what I mean? The
Yeah.
4K. Birds shooting from the lightning, and the smoke coming from the back, and everybody looking to the sky. It's just so been done to death, that I got together with my friends Jason Wish and Jeff Tremaine, and we talked about what could we do, with the amount of money that we had, uh, and we decided on this like 2-part mini series, and we had so many funny phone calls, with the whole crew and the camera guys. How are we going to do this? And coming up with the ideas. It was really fun. Everything about this album has been really fun.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I really enjoyed the videos, and I wanted to talk about one track that kind of took me by surprise, and that's the track that's called "Runaway Train," which is like really, I mean, if I didn't know that there was an LA Gun song, I would have never. Well, I would have recognized Phil's voice, of course, but that's really out of left field for you guys.
It is. The last time I wrote something like that for LA Guns was a song called Time. And Time was on a Cleopatra release. It was our greatest hits and Black Beauties album.
This one right over here.
Yeah, that one. So, that was the last time, I did an open tuning, swampy kind of thing. And the inspiration for that was Blind Blake. And Blind Blake's music has been featured on a show called Reacher. And I was laying in bed one night watching Reacher, and I think it's Police Blues or something. I can never remember the names of songs, but they kept playing this song. I'm like, what is that tuning, man? And so I went on YouTube. I figured out the tuning, and I just started, you know, fucking around with it, really. And then I came up with that little choo choo train riff right away. It's more like Viva Las Vegas, it has more of that vibe. But then, I put in the swampy changes, and, I sent it to Adam, our studio drummer, and I said, hey, how are we going to pull this off? How are we going to do this? And we tried all different kinds of methods of vintage drum recording and stuff like that. And that's the crazy thing about progress, is your ears, even when you're trying to create something nostalgic, your ears don't like it. Your ears I still want to hear Adam's drum sound, and that's how it ended up. And it's like, yeah, that's it, so it's like we ended up being true to ourselves, but the songwriting style, the genre style is certainly different. But the icing on the cake is Phil, like you said, and British white guys can sing Southern black blues like nobody else. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to talk about the upcoming tour you're on, which is very exciting for people where I'm from because I'm in Buffalo, New York, and you guys are playing your second date on the tour
Yeah.
on April 23rd. I got that right. April 23rd
Yeah.
at the Riviera Theater in North Tonawanda, which is right by Buffalo. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful theater, and it's been a while since you guys headlined. I can't remember of a time that you guys ever headlined in Buffalo area in like a theater as opposed to a club or
Right.
opening like for AC/DC or
Right.
an arena show. So we're
Right.
very excited about this. So I want to talk to you about the tour, and I also want to ask you. And of course, you've crowbarred some of the new stuff into the set list, and
Yeah.
can you tell us how many new songs will be in the set list?
We're gonna start out doing Lucky Motherfucker and Hit and Run. And
Excellent.
those will satisfy us. Um, but there's always a test period of like 5 shows to see how the certain songs go over with the audience, because we don't really like dropping the energy live. LA Guns is historically high energy, so we'll see how it goes, and then if Hit and Run for some reason is boring to everybody, then we'll substitute it with something else. But right now, that's what we're working on.
Yeah, yeah. It's. I'm really looking forward to the show. I'm like I said, it's a beautiful theater, and it's going to be great seeing you guys. Headline. We saw you last year. You played. You were co-headlining with KK Downing's KK's Priest,
Right.
and that was great to see you guys. But we all wanted a longer set.
Yeah, of course, of course. But the greatest thing about supporting someone like KK is we get to pull out all the heavy stuff. You
Oh
know,
yeah, it was a heavy set. Yes, for sure.
and if you compress it into 45 minutes and you just do as much as you can, and then you finish with Ballad of Jane. It's like
Right, right.
that's always the formula. We cannot not play that song. When we tour with Tom Kiefer, which we will be doing the second part of touring, which will last a very long time. It varies from night to night. Sometimes we get an hour 15, sometimes we get an hour, sometimes we get 45 minutes. But headlining is always the way we start. We go out and we headline, and for a month, and we get to try things out. We get to go through all this crazy catalog of music, and every now and then we pop one or two new. But the cool thing about doing that is once we played a song live that we haven't done in a long time, it becomes like a permanent in the trick bag. So like, let's say we play for an hour and 20 minutes and everybody's still excited in the audience. We got 10 more songs we can play. And sometimes we do.
Now, are you concerned at all with the way the current situation we're in as far as the economy goes, with it going back and forth and nobody knows what the hell is going on? As far as touring goes, okay, those are dollars that not a lot of people are going to be able to spend if
Yeah.
they're worried about, paying like 25, 30% more for like everyday things. You guys are smart because you're out early. So you're not
Right.
going to be, well, right away, but like later on when you said we're with Tom Kiefer, then we get into the very busy, I think oversaturated summertime where,
Yeah.
everyone's out on tour, and ticket prices are insane. I mean, for the
Yeah.
most part, I mean, your tickets for the show coming up are very reasonable, which is good.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you guys keeping it so like people can afford to go to your shows and not like, charge outrageous prices. But are you concerned at all about that without really knowing what the hell is going on?
Well, I'm more concerned about the population. I'm not so concerned with, our touring numbers and things like that, because historically entertainment thrives in economic hardship. People are looking for an escape, and America is built on credit cards. So it's not so much an economic issue for the bands. It's an economic hardship on the audience, but they'll go. concert goers are concert goers. You know what I mean? It's what they do. It's their hobby. It's their passion. And we do keep our prices, very reasonable compared to what we make. We make a certain amount of money, and we're able to do that by charging a reasonable price, but not having extras. We don't bring any extra unnecessary bullshit, to make us more comfortable or make the show more grand. We rely on our music and the characters in the band. We have a tour bus and gas, like we really keep it there. And the same with Tom Keeper. We have the same management. So, but the greatest thing about the two bands touring together is we're all like-minded, and we're all budget conscious, and we make a lot of money, but we make that money work for us, and so we don't have to charge ridiculous prices, to pay for, extravagant things, and it's funny. I see younger bands that have been around maybe 5 years, who have had great success complaining about the cost of touring. And it's bewildering because I know what they make. It's like, so you're saying you make twice as much as LA Guns and you can't tour comfortably? You're lying. You're just fucking lying. And, musicians do have a sense of comfort entitlement at a certain point, which is very detrimental to them, and ultimately that lets down the audience because, because you couldn't have your, $40 apples from Japan, you're not going to tour. Come on, man. Yeah, but we make it work, and we keep the prices as low as we can.
Some of these ticket prices are ridiculous. Like, you could get up to like $250 to, sit like, half a mile away from the stage for some of these like arena shows. It's like insane. And they still manage to do it. I don't know if like how pampered some of these shows are, but still, you think you would rather, instead of having to do like a last second, like last ditch, give away free tickets, pamper it, just have a reasonable price right out of the gate.
Yeah.
It seems to me that would be better.
Some of my favorite artists, man, they charge that kind of like crazy money, and
Yeah.
they do great, but that's at that level, that is a business manager doing the research, because someone like Springsteen isn't going to charge those prices if they're unrealistic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's the same with the Super Bowl. It's the same with the playoffs. They know people are going to pay that. And business has no conscience. That's where I fail. I have a conscience with my business, because we're more like a boutique store. You know what I mean? We're not like a big corporate business. We have a separate merchandise company, and we have our touring company, and it's very small business. We have less than 20 employees, I think, like 17 employees. And, so the sanity level's great. It's pretty stress-free because, we offer a product that has an audience, and, we count on our audience, and they're always there.
Going back to the early days of the band, that's on the Sunset Strip, was there a lot of competition between LA Guns and the other bands coming up, like in the, later 1980s, like, right around your first record?
I don't know if there's competition, because I think, the cool thing about our scene was everybody kind of had an individuality, as to where in between Motley Crue and LA Guns, Guns N' Roses, Poison, Faster Pussycat, Jet Boy, Junkyard. I hate leaving people out. There was this metal thing going on, and it was very structured around the new wave of British metal, where it was very focused. It was very Judas Priest, way more Priest than Maiden too. It was very, short, hard-hitting songs. Maybe in the music style of Wasp, but certainly not as good as Wasp. So there was a lot of that happening. So when all of our bands started coming through the clubs, um, we all kind of had the same influences. We kind of all were working off the same formula of taking metal and mixing it with either funk or blues or rockabilly, kind of vibes, goth, like a lot of these elements were in our genre. Um, so there wasn't a lot of competition, but there sure was a lot of watching the new bands come in with their tiger stripe, pants and crazy blonde hair, and like the amplified Poison look. Poison was always Poison. I mean, they're just, to me, super cool. But the bands that kind of were influenced by Poison, they took it to a level that was more comedy than serious rock and roll.
Looking back at your catalog, is there any particular release of yours where you kind of like, think back like in retrospect that you're surprised that it didn't maybe do as well as you thought originally it would have done?
Well, I don't know about that, but I mean, I can definitely tell you my favorite record is Waking the Dead. That's the best LA Guns record, for a lot of reasons. Number one, the songs, but to me, that's the peak of Phil and I's collaboration. Like where that, and Adam Hamilton was involved in that too. He was the bass player of the band at the time. Now he's the studio drummer. So he's the secret ingredient to making great things for LA Guns. And oddly enough, my least favorite record is the album we did right before it, called Man in the Moon, which are within a 2-3 year period. So that just shows kind of this frequency of how things go, like the ups and downs, those are really tied together. And I think the more recent frequency dip was Checkered Past, our third new record, if you want to call it that, where I thought it was a very diverse record. But now when I listen to it, I feel that Adam and I didn't hit it hard enough. That's like, it's like, oh, we got lazy after the first two hitting so hard, and we're just like, yeah, we could do, whatever, cool. The songs are good, but it doesn't hit as hard, and that's unfortunate. That's my fault. But yeah, there are. I don't know, because I don't really measure success by sales per se, because these days we peak out every record. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, we get like a certain million number of streams, and we sell 25,000 hard pieces of music worldwide, because that's all that they make. So all that's kind of weird. But I mean, we had really great success at the beginning of the pandemic with a song called "Let You Down," where we weren't going to tour, where we were just started thinking about making a record, and we recorded that song and put it out during that incredibly strange time, and it really resonated with people that had never heard of us before. So that was a surprise. That was a really nice surprise to do that. So so when you try to do that, you're setting yourself up for disappointment, and we just don't do it. We make the music we want to hear and what we're feeling at the time. But I can't really say that anything stands out that should have been a grander public experience. I mean,
Right.
I love our records. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I wasn't really saying it from like, from material per se, because you're one of the few bands that have that quality. And I have to say, and I know a lot of people agree with me, you've heard this before, but when you look at the bands from the 1980s, I mean, LA Guns is a band that is still consistently putting out new music, and
right.
great new music. And you could almost say, as good, if not better, as your classic lineup music. I mean, I can say that and be real honest about it, because it's true, and a lot of people would back me up on that. So kudos to you
Oh,
guys for like
okay.
continuing on. But
Thanks. I
but the
mean,
what
I'm glad that that there's an opinion like that. But the goal from day one is to always write timeless music, right? Like that's always been the LA Guns goal, is, to try to not to fit in too hard, Um, but I mean, there are things that I definitely agree with about that. Number one is the musicality, the musicianship, the ability to use knowledge that I've acquired and all the musicians in the band have acquired over 40 years, and also the technical skill to record this stuff, which is definitely superior to what we were dealing with, for the first 10 years of the band, let's say, and it's a strange thing to say because we spent millions of dollars making those records, literally millions of dollars. And they don't sound better than the records that we make now, but we didn't have the luxury of email and digital recording and, analog to digital converters, like this technology that is just incredible, and most people don't care about the technical side of how it gets done, but a really interesting thing for me from a technical point of view is that U2 continued and might still continue to use these 8-bit ADAT tapes to record their albums. That is really lo-fi, by technical standards. But it just goes to show it doesn't matter what you record it on. You write a great song, you do the best you can, and they make equalizers, and equalizers make everything better. It's just the truth.
I know we're running out of time here, but I want to ask you one last question. I want to get your opinion on the record Hollywood Vampires, which was the third record. It's as a fan at that time, I remember there was like a lot on the line. It was like, your third record. This was going to be the record that would bring LA Guns to like, the next level, and it was really a solid record. But I mean, the timing of it was a little off because that's when, he started going, it was 91. So we
Right.
started going into grunge, Jane's Addiction. I mean, Red Hot Chili Peppers, all those bands were kind of like, happening at that time.
Right.
So looking back at that, what insight can you tell me about that time period for you in the band? I mean, was there a lot of pressure on the record label to create this like multi-platinum record, or what can you
Um,
tell us?
well, the president of the label at that time was Dick Asher,
Mhm.
who was such a well-respected record man, and he and I had a relationship, and I was very young, I was 21 when we recorded our first record, and he was like 69, 70. And, the one thing he always would say, during our conversations and stuff is like, you don't have to worry about having a home. You do whatever you want. You make the music that you want, and I'm going to support it, and I'll make sure this label supports it. So by the time, we got done with the Cocked and Loaded tour, which was a grand slam, it was time to do something else. And Bob Scoro was our A&R guy, and we had turned in 22 demos. We were rehearsing and writing and recording every day for months. And, we were really happy with what we were doing. We'd already been through, Rick Rubin, George Drakoulias, Eddie Kramer, all the greatest producers and engineers. And we knew that we were absolutely doing the right thing for the band. Bob Scaro comes in and goes, where's Sex Action? Where's Never Enough? It's like, well, we already did that. That's always been our mentality, is it's like, we're not working for you. You know what I mean? We're not here with our 12% that we pay back from our advances to enrich you. It's like, you give us all this money and we got to pay it all back at a lopsided deal, because that's just the way it is, that we're going to go ahead and do exactly what we want to do. And we're confident in what we do. So we're sorry, Bob, that you don't have Girls, Girls, Girls Part 3, kind of a thing. And he's still a dear friend to this day. But the label, Dick Asher, let him go, because, Dick had stuck to his position on the band of believing in the music that we were going to create in the future. And so it was interesting because the album came out and it hit a different audience, and a lot of the normal audience, they weren't having it. They're like, what's this? This is different. This is weird. I'm not used to this. And what it ended up doing is we still sold the same amount of records. It still sold 600,000 records like we were doing with those records. But now we had added people to the audience. So even though the great bands of the 90s were coming out and taking over the airwaves, we had solidified a new fan base as well as our existing fan base. And that really got us through the rough time. The rough time was, 94 through 2004, I guess, like something like that. That was the rough time. But we still had the girth, to go and play live and at least pack clubs, you know what I mean? Yeah. And, now those songs, Kiss My Love Goodbye, It's Over Now, Over the Edge, we have to play those songs. You know what I mean? So like it was the long range view, of how are this set of songs going to hold up later? And we were right. We were right.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely one of my favorite ones. But I remember when it first came out, I kind of thought, like you said, as a fan, it was different, but I
Yeah.
liked it, And you guys, I remember seeing you open for AC/DC like shortly after it came out,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I thought was amazing. So I mean, that was a great tour to kind of, play on. I'm sure that you have some great stories on that particular tour.
Well, we had toured with them on our first record too.
Oh, okay.
So that was another, gear in our machine was the AC/DC team. They loved us, and they always supported us, and they always wanted to hang out and go on tour, and they gave us that opportunity with Hollywood Vampires. So when you make friends, in this business, and everybody's kind of fighting for rock and roll, just be great at what you do, and don't overthink it. The whole confirmation, to conform in any way in a rock and roll band is self-sabotage. You know, um, really caring about what other people think. It's like you're making the paintings, man. Either you're making them for hotels or you're making them for artistic value. You can't do both. And we want to write different music all the time.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you are. Like I said, I mean, the quality of the music is outstanding, and that I like the diversity too, because you don't want to release the same record like over and over and over again. I mean, for some bands it works,
It
but I
does. It
mean,
really works for some.
yeah, but I mean, for you guys, it works what you're doing right now too, and I think I think you get a lot more respect also from doing that because people really see that you're like, as a musician, you're, pretty deep and you're versatile, which is, you know, I think that's good also.
I'll tell you what feels good is I get a lot of respect from my peers,
Right.
you know, and that's invaluable, to be able to go to dinner with, 100 different musicians at any given time and have this mutual respect and understand where, each guy's coming from. Um, that's a huge thing for me, is having the support of my friends and my fellow musicians and, some guitar players that I just absolutely worship, that they support me, that's the warm jacket that I have is that kind of camaraderie with people I really respect, and I don't feel that, I would get that kind of respect if it was a singular Tracii Guns sound. I don't have a specific sound, like a lot of the greats do. Eddie Van Halen certainly did,
Yeah.
Randy Rhoads did. But I definitely have a style, and that style has a bigger encyclopedia than the guys that are older than me. And the guys that are younger than me, they even have a bigger encyclopedia to draw from. So I love Devo as much as I love Led Zeppelin. So now what? You know what I mean? It's like, when Eddie came out, he had Rick Derringer and Clapton and Brian May and Jimmy Page and Hendrix, So he made the best of that salad, but then and I got Steve Jones, and all this other stuff that I love just as much. And, Bow Wow Wow was a big influence on my guitar playing. So, as time goes on, music should be more diverse within one artist. But sadly, in the pop realm, it seems like it's become very compressed again, like this very singular, great beat and a great chorus, but not a lot of meaning. However, I saw Brandy Carlisle and Elton John on TV last night, and that blew my mind. Wow, it exists. It's there. This is real.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Tracii, I guess we'll end the interview there. I want to thank you for your time, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at the Riviera Theater. I will be in the front row, right in front of you, so you'll see me again. And I'm
Okay.
definitely looking forward to seeing that show.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We'll see you, Tracii. Bye-bye.
Later, brother.